I am Roxy Coranda. I am a designer at Atten Design Group based out of Denver, Colorado. And today I'll be talking to all of you about giving and getting great feedback. Let's start with giving. Giving feedback is a crucial part of any design project, and the amount of thought invested in the feedback can greatly affect your outcome. It's really easy for people to get caught up in their own emotions and forgetting what other people are capable of understanding and what information might be important to them. And this is how vague feedback like, I just don't like it, or make it pop, or give me some wow factor, doesn't really help solve a problem and just results in confusion and unnecessary iterations. And these also obviously have the potential to disrupt your timeline or your budget. So knowing how to give solid feedback can solve some of these issues and make the course of a project run a little bit more smoothly. So how can our initial reactions be translated into productive feedback? I've outlined a few characteristics of effective feedback. It's loosely based on SMART, which is a goal-setting acronym which stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. I've adjusted it a little bit. It says SGORT, actually, so hopefully that's equally as memorable. But this is catered mostly towards giving feedback, so it's different from SMART. This list is primarily intended for clients to keep in mind when providing feedback, but it can also be used for internal feedback, such as a designer giving another designer feedback, or design giving front-end feedback during the QA process. Additionally, these ideas could possibly apply to your strategy and development phases as well, but I will mainly be speaking about design today, but whatever you end up getting out of it, awesome, but I'll be talking about design. So let's get started. The first property of great feedback is specific, which might seem like an obvious one. Being specific is imperative to providing helpful feedback. Anticipate the fact that others might not be on the same page as you, and be sure to communicate your thoughts thoroughly. It's important to clearly identify a problem in addition to any ideas you might have to solve that problem, because it's really easy to just say, oh, make that blue, and then instead you want to know, oh, well, why am I making that blue? So a more thorough understanding of the root of the problem can drastically impact the potential successes of proposed solutions. And sharing this awareness with others allows them to contribute ideas as well, so that always helps. So for example, you could say something like, the navigation isn't prominent enough, instead of saying something like, make the navigation bold and underlined and italicized. You want to know what problem it is that bolding, italicizing, and underlining would actually solve. So putting forth more effort to thoroughly understand the root of the problem can result in questioning initial proposed solutions and replacing them with more effective ones. Some questions you can ask yourself to see if your feedback is specific include, is the wording vague or open-ended? Would someone else know what this means? Am I identifying a problem in addition to explaining my ideas for solutions to that problem? Could the receiver of the feedback easily translate this into an actionable to-do item? Just to note, though, being specific does not in any way mean being wordy. Be concise, just don't leave out any details that are actually really important to you. So you have to find a nice balance there. It's okay to be less precise, one exception, if you clearly communicate that you think it's best to leave a specific decision up to whoever it is that is receiving your feedback. Such as your designer or the front-end dev. Let's go through an example. I don't like it. Make it pop. This feedback doesn't really provide much information to work with. What exactly don't you like? What's the root of the problem? what specifically wouldn't satisfy your audience and make it pop? Like, what does that mean to you? If you could share an example of something that you think pops, maybe that would help out a little better. So here is that feedback translated into something more specific. This design might not appeal to our younger audience. I think it's because the colors in this design don't look friendly enough. Maybe something brighter might work. And here are some examples of our website that our audience regularly visits and enjoys. So this option is a little more specific about what might not be appealing to the audience. And it clearly identifies a problem and presents a suggestion for a solution. It also provides an example of other visuals that can be used as an inspiration to generate a color palette that might work a little better. The next property of great feedback is goal-oriented. Do your best to ensure that your feedback is consistent with your site's goals. This is a really important one. Goals provide a foundation on which our decisions are based. And these decisions ultimately work towards achieving the overall goals of the site. Just carefully reassess any ideas that don't directly align with any of your goals or user stories if that's part of your process. Some questions to ask yourself to see if your feedback that you're giving is goal-oriented could be, why do I want to add this particular feature? How will this suggestion actually benefit a user? How does this idea help us accomplish the goals of our site? And just some notes of caution, make sure you separate personal preferences from objective feedback. Sometimes your favorite color might not be appropriate for the audience of your website. Like if your favorite color is like red and black and you like black letter typefaces, if you're making a baby shower invitation, your audience might not receive that so well, maybe. And if an idea doesn't align with the goal, it's possible that you'll either want to add a corresponding lower priority goal, if that makes sense for your situation, or just reconsider the strategy behind the idea and ditch it if necessary. So here's an example. My favorite websites have these giant photo carousels with really awesome transitions. We should have one on our homepage. This suggestion seems to be based on personal emotions and interpretations of web trends, and maybe almost someone's perception of what a website should be, rather than being based on a logical explanation of how this addition would benefit the users and ultimately solve some of the goals for the site. A more goal-oriented version, users will not purchase our services unless they feel comfortable with us, so adding a cheerful photograph of our team might help. This suggestion seems to be supported by the needs of the users, and it could possibly satisfy the site's goals. It's worth at least considering. Organized is the next property of great feedback. Good organization can make a large quantity of written feedback a lot easier to read, which decreases the likelihood of any of it being missed. Several paragraphs of written feedback produced by multiple people can take a lot of time to digest and organize into an actionable to-do list. If you don't have enough time to organize feedback from all the members of your team, at least consider encouraging them to organize their own feedback instead of sharing a giant block of continuous text that could take a while to read. So let's go through a few properties of organized feedback. The first is consolidated. If multiple people share the same concerns within the feedback, consolidate all those similar points into one singular point rather than sending along duplicate feedback. Another property is categorized. Consider sorting your feedback by location within the design. That is header, navigation, footer. Each of those categories could have a paragraph or section with a bolded title associated with them. Alternatively, you could sort by type. So have a paragraph about typography and then a paragraph about colors or a paragraph about images. Organized feedback could also be prioritized. It's not required, but if time is a concern, it might be something worth thinking about, just to organize your feedback by level of importance. Just make sure you made it clear that you have prioritized the feedback. Otherwise, if the person receiving it doesn't know that you have, then it might as well not be prioritized. And the last one is formatted. Taking time to format your feedback can increase its scannability, which allows the reader to absorb the information faster, which is always good. Just remember to keep your formatting consistent. Changing it could just make things weird. And be concise. 1 or 2 sentences per bullet point is plenty. And add maybe bolded headings to each section, just so it's easy to visually scan. And here is an example. This is the beefy hunk of text I was talking about a second ago. It's really long, and it'd take a lot of time to read this through one time, and then to go back and make those changes. It would take a lot of effort to go back and read through this a second time just to make sure you didn't check anything, didn't miss anything, essentially. So if you do receive feedback like this, it might help if you organized it yourself, just so you don't have to deal with it a second time around. Whereas feedback received that's organized with bolded headings, brief bullet points, in a logical categorization, it really makes it easier to refer back to when you're actually going through and making the changes that are relevant. Oh, speaking of relevant, that's the next property of great feedback. It's really important to remember what type of feedback is helpful and necessary for the task at hand. Ask yourself, is this the type of feedback that's requested? Am I sharing this feedback with the right person? Is this relevant to the current stage of the project? Here's an example. Can we switch out all the profile images on the About page for different ones? It sounds like a pretty reasonable request, but unless the composition of the photo greatly affects the page design, finalizing specific photography during the design phase isn't usually necessary. It just adds an additional step to the process, which could take a lot of time if you're using something like Photoshop. So this is the World Resources Institute website that my company, Atten Design Group, created. And this is their experts and staff page, which just has a bunch of headshots of the leadership team. And none of these specific photographs of these people really affects the overall page design, that it's completely okay to just go back and switch them out later, which leads to the more relevant version, which is the overall page layout looks great. We'll switch out the photos later, says no client ever. So oftentimes, switching out miscellaneous small photos makes more sense to do when the site is developed and ready for real content to be uploaded. Essentially, that's what Drupal's for, so use it. And the last property of great feedback is timely. Obviously, receiving feedback late might result in a delay of the project, the planned project schedule, and maybe even budget, who knows. It is important to note, however, that just because the timing might not be perfect, new ideas should always be welcome. They could cause portions of a project to change course a little bit, but just be flexible and check with your project manager to see if a change in course is realistic. So now that we're aware of the components of good feedback, here are some additional suggestions that might make the feedback cycle run a little bit more smoothly. The first is show empathy. So everybody has a different perspective and a unique role in a project. Do your best to learn what those roles are and formulate an ability to put yourself in their shoes when it makes sense to do so. Make an effort to ask questions that are relevant to who you're actually talking to. Also, when giving feedback, consider pointing out things you like in addition to things that need to be improved. And I'm not just saying that to worry about about people's feelings necessarily, but knowing what a client likes allows us to notice patterns, which will increase the likelihood of the project turning out how they want. But definitely if you list things that you like about a project, keep those completely separate from things that you think need to be improved, just so it's easy to know what needs to be worked on further and what we need to see more of. And obviously, showing empathy does not mean holding back negative feedback. Just make sure it's kept constructive and relatively respectful. Establish a common vocabulary. It's pretty important to make sure everybody is on the same page linguistically. If there's any industry-related terminology that clarifying up front would be helpful, or if instead you could just use simpler words, it'll only make the process easier. Also, try to avoid buzzwords and phrases. They're often vague and they mean something different to everybody anyway, like make it pop. So yeah, have none of that. Consider different methods of communication. Sometimes your default method, which is often typing, isn't the most effective way to get your message across. Don't hesitate to suggest an impromptu phone call or a video chat, or just to send over some sketches. As I mentioned, typed is oftentimes the default way of communication with clients. Typed messages are great for keeping a history of everything that's happened in a project, and sharing information with people who couldn't be in the meeting. But there are some limitations that spoken feedback could clear up. If you have an impromptu phone or video conversation, those are great for clarifying complex points right away, and ensuring that everyone is on the same page quickly. And in combination with those two, you can insert some visual methods of communication as well, just to make things easier to understand. Try screen sharing, or taking a screenshot, or you could use a program such as Sketch, which allows you to pretty much insert your feedback right on top of the thing that you're giving feedback on. And it really helps in situations where you're trying to describe something that doesn't really have a name, like, oh, I'd really like to move that yellow rectangle that has other rectangles on top. It looks kind of like a book. Just move that down a little bit. And it's a lot easier if you can just like put an arrow right on top of it and say, this, move this. And aside from using something like Sketch, if you have an idea, sending along a photograph of a sketch sometimes is really effective. If you have an idea in your head that you can't find an example of anywhere else in the world, seems like a really efficient way to communicate that. Reread and revise. Try not to make the mistake of hitting send too soon. Before you send on feedback, ask yourself, does this meet all the criteria of successful feedback that I just outlined? Is the message clear? Could my feedback be interpreted in different ways? Will the vocabulary I'm using make sense to everyone? Also, ask questions. If you don't understand something, don't be afraid to ask for clarification. Also, encourage your clients to ask questions as well. This way, miscommunication won't result in, weird surprises from the client's perspective. So that's the end of my list for suggestions on communicating clearly. Obviously, there's some exceptions to these rules. I even mentioned a few, but hopefully these guidelines can help ensure that the feedback you're providing is on track to being more productive. But how to actually receive great feedback is kind of a different story. As designers, is there anything else we can do besides create the best design we can, send it off to the client, and then just cross our fingers hoping that the client will respond with some feedback that's like productive to the project? I definitely think there is. Before we jump into that, let's first clarify why feedback is so important in the first place. So feedback from a client lets us know whether or not we're on track to solving their goals clearly and effectively. As a bonus, it provides an opportunity to have additional collaboration that keeps all parties working together, contributing ideas throughout the entire process. It's important to note that great feedback, again, does not equate to positive feedback, as I just outlined during the first half of my talk. Great feedback refers to productive observations or suggestions that are specific, goal-oriented, organized, relevant, and timely. And initial design ideas are always adaptable, and some solid constructive criticism can really send them in the right direction. So, why do we sometimes receive unproductive feedback? In order to gain some insight as to how we can improve the feedback process, let's start with analyzing factors that contribute to less productive feedback. So I'm going to go through these factors that contribute to less productive feedback, and then afterwards I will follow up with things we can do to solve them or prevent them from happening. So the first is miscommunication. It's possible that failing to mention certain details might completely change a client's perception of a design. If the purpose is to, if the purpose of the page wasn't clearly identified up front, or a certain unmentioned interactive element might completely alter the experience, somebody might be led to give feedback that they probably wouldn't have given otherwise. Limited web experience is another reason. Clients are experts at their individual trades. They understand the ins and the outs of their industry. They have a pretty good grasp of what their audience is like. But it's pretty difficult to stay up to date with an industry that isn't your own personal specialty, such as web design and development. Next is personal biases. Sometimes it can be challenging to set aside your personal feelings and opinions and your favorite colors and provide purely objective feedback that'll work towards solving the site's goals. And another one is fear. Some more innovative designs might be beyond the limits of what a lot of users might expect to see, even though the strategy behind the decisions made there were pretty solid. Deciding to take a risk that might turn some users away really pushes a lot of people out of their comfort zone. And another one is lack of time, also a pretty obvious one. Oftentimes, less productive feedback is just a result of people being busy. If there isn't enough time to read through the details or consider all potential options, or even sort out internal disagreements before you send your feedback on, things can get pretty confusing. So how do we respond to feedback that is rooted in some of these problems? So it goes without saying that patience and empathy can go a long way in situations like this. But I have a few other suggestions that I will outline in a minute. So hopefully these will point your project in a more positive, goal-oriented direction. First is analyze. If you receive some questionable feedback, just take a moment to pinpoint what isn't clear exactly. Could a different solution be proposed to solve the same problem that they're presenting? Sort the feedback you receive by productive and not so productive, just so you can easily identify what needs to be worked on and what might require more information. And after some careful analysis, you might find that something that you previously thought of as challenging feedback might actually turn up as a great idea for an improvement. And once again, ask questions. Make sure you're all on the same page. Encourage clients to explain and clarify their thought process and concerns. You can prevent a misunderstanding that might lead to decisions that don't necessarily work towards solving your site's goals. Also, ask questions about the potentially confusing or less productive feedback. just in case you might uncover an underlying problem, which would actually result in turning that feedback into productive feedback. Explain. Try justifying your decisions in a new way. Use different words, or try considering explaining through visuals or examples. If you're trying to explain an interactive element verbally, a client might get kind of confused, even if you've used every word you can possibly think of to describe something. So if you can find a pre-existing website that has a similar interaction to send their way and say, this is kind of sort of along the lines of what we're thinking for your site, just play around with this and see what you think. And that way they can see visually actually what you're talking about. Educate. Share your knowledge with a client. They might not be aware of certain research that supports your design decisions, such as the fact that users actually do scroll, and that carousels are kind of weird. People don't often scroll past the first one, and adding a little bit of white space to your design can really improve legibility. And encourage. Just be enthusiastic and confident. If you have a great idea that a client finds kind of risky, they're probably not going to get on board with it if you don't seem very confident in your idea. All right, now that we've gone over what causes unproductive feedback and how to respond to it, we can begin to formulate a strategy to reduce the probability of receiving unproductive feedback in the first place. Here are some ideas to improve the quality of feedback that we get from clients. Talk about feedback in advance. Just describe the whole feedback cycle to the client before they're in the midst of it, just so they know what sorts of feedback will push the project in a positive direction. Feel free to reference any ideas that I've presented in the first half of my talk about giving good feedback. It's also written out on Atten's website on our blog. It's atten.io. Feel free to even take some of my ideas and then add to them, subtract some, make a list that works for you, and then share that with your client. Also, when it comes time to present something that you need feedback on, instead of simply asking for feedback, try prompting the clients with some questions to get them thinking in a more objective, goal-oriented way. For example, instead of asking open-ended, opinion-based questions like, do you like this? Is this what you had in mind? Instead, ask questions like, is the goal of this page clear? Is the hierarchy of items on the page in line with your goals? Does the design style reflect your brand? Does the design style seem like something that would resonate with your audience? Does this meet the needs of your users? So just planning your questions out well in advance can kind of point them in a good direction rather than just saying, I don't like this. Be flexible. If your client is clearly very busy, consider adjusting the schedule if you can. If you give them more time to think about their feedback, chances are the quality will be greater than if you kind of force them to get their feedback in a hurry. This also gives them a chance to think things through thoroughly, and they can get all of their feedback out at once. Because if you rush them, then they might think of the same ideas they could have thought of if they had enough time, but later on in the process, when it could affect your timeline or maybe even your budget. The need for flexibility also applies to receiving design feedback as well. It's important to not get too attached to your first design and be open to constructive criticism. We need to remember that designers and clients are working together to achieve the same goal, which essentially is, in most cases, a great-looking website that meets the user's needs and solves the overall problem. So ongoing collaboration and clear communication are imperative, and successes in both of these departments can really differentiate good projects from great ones. Also, never let your design stand alone. If you can, try avoiding sharing designs without any explanation, even if the purpose of what you're sharing might seem really clear. The sooner everybody's all able to get on the same page, the better, obviously. So hold a meeting if typing out information seems like not a very efficient option. Or if you do have to type out an explanation, have a member of your team proofread your writing, just because if you're trying to make sure that your message is clear to another human being, I think asking another human being if it makes sense seems like the obvious solution. And as I mentioned before, avoid technical terms and any buzzwords, because that's not really going to get you anywhere. So frequently, the bulk of client feedback revolves around things that weren't explained clearly. So spelling things out up front could save time for both you and your client in the long run. Some things that are worth explaining include the goals of this step of the process. Sometimes misunderstanding a step in a process can lead to misguided feedback. This especially applies if your process involves presenting a more abstract design concept, like a mood board or an element collage. Just make sure the purpose of these types of items is super clear and differentiate them from a polished page design. Also explain what type of feedback you seek. A mood board or an element collage might invoke feedback revolving around the tone that certain colors and typography communicate, whereas a completed page design might require broader layout and hierarchy feedback. So just make it clear what it is you're asking for. And explain the details. Walk a client through what it is that they're viewing. Point out any potential spots for interactivity that might be difficult to represent in still images or are impossible to represent in still images. Anticipate any questions they might have and explain any potentially confusing parts in advance. One thing I do is that I take notes on things that might seem confusing as I'm designing a page, just so it saves me time when I finish the page when I'm working on a presentation to present a design concept to a client. That way I don't finish the whole page design and then I have to think of, oh, well, what was I supposed to explain about this? I don't remember. So how can we prevent similar recurring feedback? Sometimes hearing the same feedback repeatedly across multiple projects for multiple clients can uncover an area where you can improve. Just identify and reflect upon previous feedback that you've received and the patterns of feedback before you jump into a new project, and learn from those and make any adjustments to your process that might help out due to whatever it is that you learned. Asking the right questions in the early stages of a project could really make a big difference. For example, it might make sense to mention some commonly controversial design topics to a client early in the process, just to learn where they stand and figure out a good approach together. Sometimes it's good to have that carousel conversation up front rather than after you've gone through a couple design iterations. So overall, in analyzing the process of giving and getting feedback, it's been further reinforced to me that creating a website is a team effort, and the client plays a really important role on that team. So we really need to put a lot of stock in what they have to say. So hopefully these few ideas on giving and getting great feedback kind of help your projects run maybe a little bit more smoothly. That's about all I got. Thanks, everybody. Does anybody have any questions or feedback-related comments they'd like to share?
How do you weigh the importance of certain people's feedback over others? Is there a systematic way that you do that? or you just use your own opinion? What do you think of the people?
It definitely depends on the situation. If you're talking about a client that has multiple people on a team, we've usually found that it's great to nominate one person of the whole client's team to be the main contact point and the primary decision maker, just in case there is a situation where different people on the team have conflicting ideas, just so there's that one contact point to say, okay, I think we should move more in this direction versus this direction that this other person on the team suggested. But obviously there is no systematic way to decide who's right and who's wrong. But like I said, it's not really about anyone being right or wrong. It's just different strategies to try and solve a goal.
Have you ever had a situation where you had an important client who's giving you feedback that you knew deep down in your heart that the person was just wrong?
Wrong? I mean, wrong is kind of a harsh word. I mean, I laid out a bunch of ideas about why feedback could be lesser productive and that you're supposed to have good reasons behind it. So it seems like if they're wrong, per se, maybe they just haven't been educated about the web enough, or maybe they don't understand their audience, or maybe you actually don't understand their audience. So it's really hard to kind of balance their who's right and who's wrong. So I don't think those are really the most accurate words to use for that situation. You there?
Hi. I like that you use smart goals as a basis, and I was wondering if you used any other kinds of educational modalities, like in conversations like rubrics or pre-test, post-test kinds of ways to communicate with clients.
I haven't used anything super official. Obviously, I kind of fudged smart a bit and made it work for me. So I guess I can't really think of anything that's been like tested or well documented off the top of my head. But if I do, stop by the Atten booth outside, and we can talk later. Yes.
If you have a team where some or sometimes even all of the experts really aren't giving you feedback or staying in communication well, do you have any particular techniques that you find work to get everyone re-engaged?
At Atten, we try to keep constant communication with our clients. So just the fact that we talk to them once a week kind of can resolve any potential problems where they're concerned about something that they saw a couple days ago. So talking constantly definitely really helps. Really, the main thing is just clear communication and make sure they have all their questions answered and that you've explained exactly what you're doing and what they need to expect throughout the process. Anybody else? Everybody wants some lunch? You in the back?
I was just going to ask how you guys handle like prioritization of level of effort. So I want to redesign the entire website versus I want to change an image.
Can you elaborate a little bit?
Well, some clients will say, I want to do this stuff, and they don't understand the level of effort of what they're asking for, versus the smaller level of effort pieces you may be able to accomplish more of.
We have a pretty good grasp of what is reasonable in what we've outlined for a current project budget. And if anything is kind of like teetering on the edge, that's when we bring the project manager into the discussion, and that's not really my decision to make as a designer. It's more of a whole. How do we communicate that to a client?
Yeah, so you go to the project manager?
Yes, we usually direct them to the project manager, and they have that conversation. And we also go through a scope review midway through the project to make sure we're all on the same page. Yes?
Wasn't talked to you for a few months and then contacts you wondering why nothing's progressed. What do you say other than, well, you didn't ever respond to me?
So if they were the one who was inactive and they're wondering why you haven't been doing anything, It's really helpful to send clients a to-do. We use Basecamp at Atten. So we send our clients a to-do item saying, send us feedback on the homepage comp by July 17th. So then it kind of puts the ball in their court where they know that they have a list of things that they need to accomplish in order for us to accomplish things as well.
So on top of that, what if you've done that and they still come back months later and are wondering why it's progressed, even though they haven't responded?
That sounds like a pretty tough client. All I can say is you have to keep trying to talk to them, and if they're not answering your phone calls, you might have a bigger problem. Anybody else? Oh, in the back.
What do you think would be like a reasonable time frame to get that feedback back? Like if marketing department was doing a presentation on their design and a lot of stakeholders involved, like 9 of them, what would be a reasonable amount of time to wait for their feedback? I mean, after they've seen the design?
That definitely depends on how big of a project it is and how much they're looking at to give feedback on. And as far as how long they need, that's really just a great question to ask them. Just ask them, how much time do you need? Because we've had clients that have varying levels of free time. And the ones that don't have much free time, it's really just up to them to tell us when is the next time they have a moment to give us some feedback. Anybody else? All right, I think it's time for lunch for real this time. Thanks, everybody.